You're listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. I'm Elena Paventa, Executive Communication Coach and TEDx organizer. With each episode, I'll share with you communication tips and ideas from top business leaders to help you excel in your career. Welcome to the next episode of Ideas and Leaders podcast. Today, my guest is Sam George. He is an owner of a digital marketing and fundraising company, and he is a book author, and his latest book is called I'll Get Back to You. And today we're going to speak about this book, to speak about different concepts connected with communication and discommunication in the modern world. Hi, Sam. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Elena, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, Sam, why did you decide to write this book? What is the problem with the communication that you observe right now?
Well, ironically, how I started writing this book is this experience that we all have. I couldn't figure out, I thought I was crazy, where if someone returned a text or an email or any kind of message, that after a while, I would first get anxiety, be irritated, then, something must be wrong. And then I would jump to some crazy, worst case scenario, explanation, nothing in between, just worst case scenario. And then I would continue to catastrophize, and it would, it was like a loop. I couldn't get it out of my head. So I sought to answer that question, and I did, because it's something we all experience. In fact, I'm probably the person that's talked to you or anyone about this, let alone wrote a book. We all experience this, but we don't really talk about it. It's like a dirty secret of life. And so in doing so, though, because I'm my background is in theory, I was able to diagnose the essence of the problem with digital communication, and that's discommunication.
So what does it mean? What do you understand by discommunication?
Well, essentially, first of all, let's say when you put a dis on a word, it means difficult, like dysfunction. People think it means not functioning. No. I mean, dysfunction means it's difficult to function. And as a consequence, there's a lot of problems. What discommunication means the same thing, is that emails and text have made it more difficult to comprehend, to communicate in terms of understanding. And there are problems like the unreturned message, like too many messages, like unclear messages that continue to plague us.
Yeah. I think that it is interesting because we have now so many ways to communicate with each other. We have all of this variety of the social media platforms. We have email, we have a phone and WhatsApp and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and so on and so on. But still, we have problems with communicating with each other. So what do you think? Why is it the problem right now?
Well, phones is really a different situation. But all the other media that you discussed, they have one thing in common, and this is the essence of discommunication. There is not a direct, immediate feedback loop. Like this show, we have an immediate feedback loop. We're in a conversation by phone or in person, where someone says something, you respond, you read them, you connect. If things need to be clarified, they can be clarified. You can talk about a lot more things. It could be a very expansive, creative, have some laughs. And frequently we refer to this kind of communication, direct communication. Oh, it's a good conversation, and, there's a sense of closure, of completeness, and there's security in that. And by the way, one of the reasons people refer to as a good conversation is that dopamine is also released, a feel-good drug. So after you have a good conversation, you might feel, but there's no such thing as a good email conversation or good text conversation. or a good tweet, whatever, so that is, people have always said, oh, it's the technology, blah, 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 digital revolution, because people do talk about some of these things. They say, oh, there's too many messages, or I can't figure out communication, miscommunication, blah, 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 blah. No, what discommunication means is there's no immediate feedback loop. And this paradigm shift from immediate feedback loop to no feedback loop, or delayed or broken loop, is the biggest one in terms of human communication ever, bigger than the printing press, because since the beginning of time, not the beginning of time, 2 generations, 2 species before us, Homo sapien, people started talking the same time they started building too. I mean, this is what we do. This defines us as what is human. This is what's most important. And what's happened is that emails and text have become the predominant means of communication. And to some extent, to the exclusion of these other mediums. There are less phone calls, less meetings. Oh my gosh, people don't want to do these things. They want to communicate. But essentially, what this system does is that you take the secure base of direct communication based on a direct feedback, direct interaction, right at the same time, and it's been replaced by a system of randomness, of broken loops, of emails and texts. You never know for sure someone's going to get back to you, when they're going to get back to you, or if they'll fully understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah. So why do you think people freak out over an unreturned email or text?
That's a very interesting thing. And believe me, let me because of my background was initially in, politics, did a lot of polling and focus groups. So I did this with this issue. And I'm going to tell you that everything that I'm telling you has about a 70% affirmation in general public. So the first step is basically someone doesn't return your message, okay? The second step is that after a while you feel agitation or anxiety when you start thinking about what, it doesn't take you that long to start thinking about what they haven't returned your message. And then you decide something is wrong. Well, why is something wrong? And the next plane at some point, doesn't take you long, could be the end of the day, you decide, you jump to a worst case scenario. In other words, you may try and tell yourself, oh, they're busy, blah, blah, blah. You can try and tell yourself that. What happens is you jump to a worst case scenario. You catastrophize. I mean, and what some of these things, your wife's at a conference and you've been texting her, since all night, it's 1 o'clock at night, and jump to the conclusion she's having an affair or something. I mean, this is the kind of stuff people do all the time. And this is this is the problem. And it really highlights now why that happens is it highlights what happens when there is a gap, when there is a delayed response. That shows you that's on the extreme. But actually, the reason this happens, people say, oh, it must be fear. Elena, it's not fear at all. The most advanced part of the brain is the reason why, the neocortex. The brain, we form patterns. That's how we understand everything. This has been established by neuroscience. And what happens is when a pattern's not complete, like in the case of an unreturned message, is the brain will do everything it can to complete that loop. And this means this is the foundation that quite unconsciously we jump to a worst case scenario because our brain simply wants to create the loop and store it. Before all the loops were connected, didn't have to have this kind of, we're not wired for digital communication because essentially of this process. I can just tell you that this is embedded and this is a problem in the way it's a structural problem. And there's no way out of this problem but to gain a greater awareness. And I have solutions as well. But the bigger threat really is the discommunication crisis that basic, it's really kind of difficult. It's kind of an abstract concept, right? But let me make it concrete. Could you do this meeting through email or text, Elaine? Could you do an interview of this 20, 30 minutes through text?
Yes, definitely not.
Okay, right. Why couldn't you do this meeting through text? Give me some of the reasons.
I think that it would take a too long time, and I would not feel emotions of my guests. And I think I can see where you're going. That
Could you get into the depth of this conversation?
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Okay. Would you have a good feeling at the end of it?
Not really, not really. I know that some of the interviewers, for example, for newspapers and journals, they are now doing this, and because it takes less time for them, less work for them. They're just sending out the questions and they're getting answers by email. But I think that this does not give the depth, and you cannot
Right. I mean,
ask
that really
additional
is a different
questions.
issue. I mean, they're just looking for facts. Can you tell me X, Y, and Z? I do think, and what we're talking though is about a conversation, right? We're talking about an exchange back and forth. A reporter that has 5 questions, they can simply put it in an email. It's not the same thing. They're not looking to have a conversation. They just want to know, okay, what are your responses to the questions? But this is a conversation. And conversations, by definition, you can look it up. They say talking to other people in real time. By definition, a conversation means direct feedback. So just for all the things you can't communicate, you can't connect, the depth. I mean, yes, no. I mean, that's about the level of you can't, it's difficult to clarify. You have to keep, you can't expand. I mean, essentially what you just said, it shows you that texts and emails are like this little stream compared to the ocean of direct communication. And that's the problem, is just one, the misunderstanding, but two, I mean, God, we've limited communication to this very narrow media. And you know what? We've gotten so used to it, and we've become lazy because it's easier. It's easier to send a text or an email than it is to have a conversation. It's easier. But I can tell you right now that what a consequence beyond this is that it's to the exclusion. There are people, oh, we talked all night, we talked for hours, people have, regular lunches and, things of that nature. So the emails and texts and digital communication, there are other forms too, but they all are the same. They don't have this direct feedback, are replacing the things that make us human. I mean, these kinds of direct make us feel good, that make us feel connected. And that may be the greatest danger of all, that we lose touch with each other and we lose touch with ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. So do you think that there is a solution for this problem? Do you think that we can reduce miscommunication?
Well, let me speak in the macro. So how do we reduce discommunication in the macro? I will just tell you, I do not believe mediums like this, Zoom or the answer in the short term. There was a vast survey of people who are virtual workers, and they cited 22% of them cited email as a reason they wanted to leave their work. These kind of workers get a ton of it, but 27% said interactive technology, Zoom or its equivalent. There's glitch, it's grueling, it's alienating. Even though we have direct communication right now, you're in a box. I can't read your face that well. So this is not the, this for now. And also we've had the ability to use FaceTime on our iPhones and the equivalent on Android. For 10 years, but no one calls their friends on their iPhone with FaceTime. So the reality test is that people don't do it, that they won't do it. We know this, right? We know this from the history of, it's been 10 years where we could easily call our friends and communicate like this, and people didn't do it. They prefer a phone call. And that's true because a phone call has less distractions. I'm telling people that a conference call today is a more effective way of communicating in a group than is Skype or Zoom.
Yeah. So do you think that we can manage our messages in a certain way that we have so many of them right now?
Well, the first
in
thing is
order
that you have to
to
recognize is that we're illiterate. I mean, we're trained in school and education to write and speak, but the writing is composition. It's not, it has to do with writing essays and things of that nature. We're not taught to, so we have no education. Essentially, we have no protocols. I mean, we are illiterate in the sense that there is no literacy of how to communicate through emails and texts in these media. I mean, there's no classes, no education. We've never been trained. And that is a big piece of this. So the first piece of this, for example, for companies and things like that, or any organization, is to, and for individuals, is to educate themselves on the best practices, to develop processes. For example, a business could, to avoid the unreturned message problem, which can create a lot of problems, would say, okay, I know businesses, that a couple that require people within 24 hours to respond to an email or text. Now, I think it's important to understand before I go further of why this is happening, So on the user, on the receiver end, there's a big problem. So why are so many passages not unreturned or not responded to in a clear way? Well, that's because people don't, I mean, a lot of emails get missed. We file emails we plan to respond to, and then it's short-term memory. They fade away. Our inbox fills. You can only see about 20 of them, 25, and we forget. This happens all the time. And then the other great culprit is scanning. People don't read their emails anymore. They scan their emails, and that makes it difficult to communicate. So those are some of the things that we have to address. But like I said, I have some ideas about just some very there are 2 chapters in my book about how to go about to develop some protocol. The idea is, how do you make sure that your message is read and understood and returned in a timely way? Because that gets you pretty close. If the messengers are like that, we are getting closer and closer to this direct communication feedback. It's not perfect, but it's about all we can do. Because, Lena, to tell you the truth, I have seen the process of history, and once something sets in, it's kind of hard to reverse it. I do think that people should structure in phone calls and things like that. But do I think they'll do it? I don't know. I don't know. I just think that once the process, so our best option is to try and communicate as, in a way that's clear and precise, and that responses are returned to quickly, so that's, so we can emulate to some extent this direct feedback.
Yeah.
And so I have some solutions.
So, Sam, what would be your recommendation to our listeners, how, from the point of view of writing an email, writing a message, how can we write the message to make sure that it is read and that it is understood and that it is answered?
Well, I have a couple of chapters, and actually you could write a book on it. Like I said, we're illiterate. We have no training or education on this, and it's a dominant form of communication. We have no training or education. We don't even understand it. So I'll just give you just a few concepts that are, that really are important. The first thing is, and I know this, I get these ideas from what I've done in digital marketing. I do digital fundraising. And the first thing is that, hey, if they don't open your email, you're screwed, and that's just the bottom line of digital marketing. You're sending to a lot of people. So how do you get them to open their email? Well, it has nothing to say. Whatever you're saying in terms of the content of the email is irrelevant. All they see is a subject line. So there is, oh my gosh, study all kinds of stuff, put in subject lines. You'll see millions and millions and millions of what's the best subject lines. And we use them like, uh-oh, your prescription is expiring, or, things like that. We use some pretty, or just funny things like, we like being used. I mean, you use unusual things to create curiosity or urgency that they'll open the email. Now, I don't suggest, obviously, that you're talking to people you don't have to go to that extreme. So when I tell people, it's very important to put something other than the subject in the subject line. And this goes back to, if you put like, meeting or update or something like that, the chances of them filing it are very high, because they think, okay, I know kind of what that's about, or whatever. Even if they don't know what's about, it's so boring. Why should I look at it? I'll get to that later. And so essentially, you've got to get them to open the email. And so when I tell people, because it's, I don't think that they have all day to come up with these things. So Elena, what is I tell people what's the first word? Just come up with a random word. Okay, it could be bananas or chocolate, whatever. Just ask yourself, first word that comes to your mind, and put that in there. Okay, so Elena, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
I don't know. You told about bananas. I think that would be very
banana. Okay,
interesting.
I guarantee you,
to
if you
see
send your contact an email and it says bananas, they're going to open it up. I mean, the probability is high. And here's the thing I know from digital marketing is that the chances that when people give money online or buy, it's immediate. I mean, like, they don't go back to the email. So because of this loop, we want to close the loop, okay? So if they open the email, they're likely to respond very quickly on the spot. They're not likely to file it and come back to it, okay? So that's the first step. You get them to open the email. Listen, we have our phones. We're by our computers. It's not like we're in Bermuda. I mean, we see these emails coming in, it's not like we don't see them. But if you just have some flat subject line, well, I'll get to that later. So the worst thing to do in your subject line of an email is to put the subject in it. It's absolutely the worst thing you can do. And that you should just put, instead of that, the first word that comes to your mind. And believe me, they won't think twice. You'll think, oh, well, what would they think? They won't think twice. The world's too busy. People have too much stuff, going on, you know what I mean? And they'll just proceed. I can guarantee you they won't think twice about it. But they will open the email, and they will likely respond to you right away. The next question is, okay, how do you get them to read the email? Well, this is a challenge, because I said, I mean, people scan. They scan so much, I tell people, don't put two issues in the same email, okay? So that's how bad people scan. And so how can you get them to read the email? Well, this is the oldest trick in the book, but it still works. Use their first name at least 3 times, no matter what, at least 3 times in the email, use their first name. You should address them by their first name, You should use their name, a first name at the call to action, like Paul, comma, boom. And then you should just thank them. Thanks, Paul, Sam. Okay. That's how you do it. Then it's not, this is very clear. Elena, how does it make you feel when, someone, maybe it's a friend of a friend, someone fairly well known for years, but you're having a conversation and they don't seem to remember your name. How does that make you feel?
Really uncomfortable. And I must say that I totally agree with you on the name, because even Dale Carnegie wrote about this in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? That the name is the prettiest sound in the world to everyone. So even in the email.
If you're at the grocery store and all of a sudden 2 months, you haven't seen this lady for 2 months, you see her once in a while, and the clerk there says, "Hi, Sam." Oh, I feel like $1 million,
Yeah.
But no, they've done all kinds of neurological studies. There's nothing that excites us like our own first name. And so essentially, by putting their first name at the beginning, in the middle, and the end, you ensure that they will read your message. Believe me, they will. If their name's in it, they'll read it. Okay, so that's how you get them to read the message as opposed to scan it. Okay, then, so we have the subject line, put something in, unorthodox, banana. First thing, one word, just first thing that came in your mind. The second thing is, make sure you use your name at the beginning, at the end, when you address them, when you thank them, and then at the call to action. And let me tell you what the call to action is. Don't send, first of all, the email should obviously be economic. It should be no longer than a couple of paragraphs, 3 max, okay? But the most important thing is that you must ask a question. If you don't ask a question, there's no reason to respond, okay? So you must ask a question. Every email, every text, every communication, because of this problem, with the feedback, you have to ask a question to encourage the feedback. And so whatever you're talking about, ask a question, try and summarize it and ask a question. But here's the biggest point. Make it a yes, no. Do you agree or do you disagree? I get all kinds of things. Somebody says, here's the study. What do you think? What do I think? About what? Here is my letter to Paul, and this is the arguments I'm making it. Is this acceptable or not? Yes, no. This is how you do it. Agree, disagree. You can't put yes, no, obviously, but agree, disagree. This creates what's known as a limit situation. So one, you ask a question, which requires feedback. 2, you narrow it to something that's very specific, and either or. This will get a response, okay? And then the last thing is that, and again, too, before you ask the question, be sure to put there Elena, comma, okay? That's where you put that's the third first name. And then, and I will go through this a little bit with text after that. And the last thing is, make sure you follow up. People they're awkward, they feel uncomfortable about following up. And, you should follow up within 24 hours. And my research, the polling shows that 75% of the people welcome the response. Of course, they forgot about it. And the other people don't care. It's just they're indifferent too. So within 24 hours, now I can just tell you some things. One of the reasons that, people are squeamish about following up is they don't want the other person to feel defensive. Well, the main ways that people follow up today would be someone, okay, why didn't you, like some kind of thing is, did you get my email? Why didn't you respond to my email? You know what I mean? Or forwarding the email, like, oh my God, then they have to go through all this, try and figure out what's going on. So to follow up, the rule is within 24 hours, you send the same email, edit, copy, paste, put a new thing, apple instead of banana, boom, let it go. Same email. That's it. And that's all there is to it. And then I would suggest doing that a couple of times before, and then at that point you'll have to form, alternative means of getting them to respond. But after you've sent it, you've got to follow up. Too many emails get lost. Too many emails are get filed. You've got to follow up. With text, okay, obviously there's no subject line in text, right?
Yeah.
But you do want to start with their first name. Oh my gosh, it's presumed. I rarely get a text that says "Dear Sam," or Sam, but this is something that will add tremendously. Two, you want to in the text conversation, you want to mention the name periodic, throughout the conversation. Three, you have to ask a question. And then four, don't send texts that don't. I can tell you, here's something that I'll give you an example. So this is true for women or men, so I'm going to give you, okay, a woman goes on a date with a man. It's the third date. They're not in a relationship per se, but, it's promising. And they go out for dinner on the third date. She sends a message to him and says, "Hey, that was a great dinner last night. Thank you." Well, there was no ask for a response. It was just thanking him. I guarantee you about 4 o'clock the next day, that lady believes the relationship is over and vice versa. I mean,
because she didn't get a response.
Yes, it's simply, so don't send these kinds of things that will drive you crazy, hey, or whatever. You should send your texts. They should be the key thing about text is make it specific, right? Not random things and stuff like that. After the flow of communication, after you've established communication, you can do that. But to get the hook, to get them online, get them to answer the phone, no, you need to have a structured approach. You use the first name. You need to be very specific with them. So in this case, I would have advised the young lady to say, "Hey, that was a great food last night. Italian restaurant was great. Do you think they made their own pasta?" Something like that. Ask a question. I mean, that's kind of corny, but really seriously, it will increase the probability. Don't send a text without asking a question, because you probably won't get a response. People are, again, just like with the email, they may see it, they may look at it, but they've got a lot going on, and quickly the texts fill up and they get distracted. The other thing about text is that it's important to say goodbye. It's not just the unreturned text that makes us upset. Another thing that bothers us, it doesn't throw us into a full-blown catastrophizing like an unreturned one, but it does bother us, is all of a sudden you're having the flow of a conversation with a friend, and boom, they're gone. And then you start wondering what happened. What did I say? You see this whole cogitation. So it's very important in text messages to say goodbye. When you're ready, when the text is over, you say, "Hey, I got to get going. Thank you. I'll talk to you later." Very important to have closure. Okay. People don't do this. It leads to a lot of miscommunication, a lot of uncomfortable feeling. So on the text message, make sure to say goodbye.
Yeah. Great tips. So the subject line needs to be catchy. We need to use names. We need to ask questions and say goodbye when you write text messages.
Make sure you always in an email put something unusual: banana, apples, green, weather, you name it, whatever the first thing. But it's absolutely essential that you do this. The second thing is that you should keep it short and make the centerpiece a question, and use their name at least 3 times. Whether it's a text or an email, there has to be a question. If there's not a question, like the example I just gave you about going out to eat, if you don't get a response, you're going to do the same thing. So you have to ask a question. You have to ask for a response. And to the extent you can, try, I think in email, it's a little bit, agree, disagree kind of scenarios. Say, will you be coming to the event? Yes or no? I mean, if you just say, are you coming? Well, that's not going to get the response. If you say, are you coming? Yes or no? then they will. And you know, it may seem awkward, but hey, this is what you need to do. And you know, I find agree, disagree, accept, unaccept are you know, good ways of saying, not having to say yes, no. So it's very important not just to ask a question, but it should be an either or situation. And then finally, not finally, make sure you follow up within 24 hours. And this is true of text or emails. If you have not heard back in 24 hours, write the same email, write the same text. In the case of the email, you put a new thing in place of banana, you put apples. In the case of the text, you don't change anything. You just exactly edit, copy, paste, boom, go, like it never happened. Because almost all these things were either seen, scanned, or forgotten. So that, you know, they're not going to say, oh, you said this to me twice, you know. This will make your life a lot easier. But on text messages, I have to warn you, it's very important to be specific. And if you're having a friendly conversation, just like you would on the phone, you know, say goodbye. Because if you don't do that, the other person is left hanging, which is kind of like leaves their mind in this limbo state of wondering and jumping to worst case scenario, things like that nature. Very important to be specific, and do not send text. If you want to send a text like hey or something like that, I mean, it's just not advisable, because essentially you're likely not to get a response, and then if you don't get a response, it will drive you crazy in any such case.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam, for all of your tips. And those were just a couple of tips from Sam's book. I'll get back to you. So, Sam, where can we find your book?
Go to Amazon and just type, you've heard it, I'll get back to you. Just type that in and you'll find it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for speaking on Ideas and Leaders podcast. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, take care.
Thank you for listening to Ideas and Leaders podcast. Did you enjoy this episode? Let me know that you listened by tagging me in your LinkedIn profile and using a hashtag Ideas and Leaders. See you in the next episode.